Hello, welcome to the Promethean channel. I'm Jim, and this is Rory.
Hello, Jim. Jimmy Jim, Jim Jim, Jim, Jimmy Jim, Jim, Jim Jim, Jimmy Jim. Name that movie.
That is, that's going to be, shoot.
It is pirate related.
Oh, is
It is a
it? Oh,
classic novel. Oh, that's Muppet's Treasure Island, baby.
Muppet's Treasure Island, of course. Speaking of Muppet's Treasure Island, we're going to be talking about flashbacks.
That was a flashback to the past.
Right? To hopefully
beautiful. Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Dating ourselves.
We're going to be talking about flashbacks, specifically the do's and don'ts of flashbacks. Rory,
right?
When
Jim,
do you use flashbacks?
When I've written myself into a corner and I have to claw my way out without rewriting several pages because I'm too lazy to do so. It is far less energy to continue to be creative than to go back and change what you wrote. leave it for the editor. Oh, flashbacks they can be useful.
Mm-hmm.
I see the fewer flashbacks you use, the better, I think, because it can get confusing. I think, yeah, you can use it to correct a mistake, but everything new, in order that you give your reader, should embellish something or give them more information about something, or it should be steering their imagination somewhere else. I think it's a trope, it's a cliche, but it is fun and useful to use it to bait them for a twist later.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that guy was there the whole time, or oh, that one person, it's like in a heist movie or a murder movie, it's always that little twist, like flashback, and he was there the whole time, every scene.
Right.
I think
quick
that's
montage.
Right. Yes. When in doubt, montage. I think giving the reader more background information is probably what a flashback is best used for, because you can get a quick snap of somebody's backstory. Like, this is why they act the way they do. This is why they hold that view. They had a bad run-in with this person, which is why they're physically recoiling at the sight of them. And I think that's probably the most beneficial use for it is character development.
Yeah, I think you can use it you can also use it occasionally to reveal plot points if your story starts at a certain point in time, and then you get to a point where the reader needs this background information, but it's not going to be happening in the time order of the story. It happened before the story. For example, in The Hobbit, they talk about the mines of Moria and the assault on the mines of Moria, and they do that in flashback as narrative storytelling, because the story has to start when Bilbo gets picked up by Gandalf and Thorin and the party and goes on his adventure. They couldn't start it back when the dragon shows up. It needs to start in a hole in the ground. There lived the Hobbit, right? So they needed to give you that information of why they're on this quest in the form of a flashback.
Right. And flashbacks it's a remarkably modern literary device. You read the ancient stuff, the old stuff, like the old Greeks, Romans, you're not going to find flashbacks. Their style of storytelling is different. They give you this linear progression of story, and only when something important is pertinent to the story, then do they add it in, and then you continue on. Like you didn't know it was important until they told you it was important. Like, this person was in the story for so long, and then halfway through the story, it said he was very good looking, very intelligent, and very rich, and then the story continues on. It's like, we didn't need to know that for the first half of the story. We just left turned, and you're like, oh, I guess, okay, we're going this way.
By the way, this guy is rich.
Yes, and that will matter,
It's also useful to do as a show don't tell method.
Yes.
A flashback can be useful when you're stuck in a situation where you need to explain something, but you don't just want to give a monologue about it. It's a great way to kind of give some character backstory, some character depth, rather than just saying, oh, by the way, this guy's a murderer. You can flash back to a murder he committed or something. Like, that can be an interesting use.
Yeah.
So Rory, when do we not use flashbacks?
Ooh, you don't want to use flashbacks. Well, I can't say at the end because that could wrap things up if you really do want to montage it. You don't want flashbacks within flashbacks. You don't want flashbacks mid conversation because that just throws off the rhythm of your reader because then they have to like re-engage with the story. Anything that takes your reader out of the story and like
Yeah.
abruptly jolts their brain, you want to avoid doing. You want to make it as smooth as possible. I think there's no wrong time for a flashback except for that. I think that's for me. I think that'd be my only rule, unless you can think of something else.
Back-to-back flashbacks too.
Back to back, yeah. What
like
if
you don't want to? If you've just finished a flashback, you don't want to give 2 sentences and then another flashback. It's just going to mess with the flow, right?
What about, and I'm just playing devil's advocate, what if you have 2 characters and they both experience their own flashbacks of the same situation from their perspective?
You wouldn't do. I would say that you still wouldn't want to do that within a short amount of time. You'd want to space them out considerably because it ruins. It'll mess with your flow of the story. And
Sure.
like the only thing I can think of is no, even you could do a story where there's a bunch of different perspectives, but you still want to space those perspectives. They're all like I forget the movie, but there's a movie and it was basically like there was this somebody assassinated they assassinated this political figure, like sniper rifle from the stage, and so then the investigators are getting the different perspectives from different people, so it's a bunch of different flashbacks. But there's still a fair amount of story that's happening in between each. Like they meet this guy,
so
they do
continuity.
a flashback from his perspective. Then they have conversation. They evaluate it, whatever, and then they continue on.
Right.
You don't even with multiple different perspectives, you don't want to give those back to back because it's you need to catch what's important in the first one. Think about it, mull it over before you move to the second flashback.
So what alternatives do you have for flashbacks if you think you're going to be too flashback heavy? How do you write it without? I mean, the only thing I can think of is having an aside. You bust out your grade school grammar. That an aside is a character talking to themselves, like, God, it's junior high all over again. Or having another character go, hey, remember when John McGillicuddy pantsed you in band class? You know, it's like,
right, yeah.
It's outside of a flashback.
Yeah, you can give dialogue, especially if it's short. Like that one time this one thing happened, you can just have that be text, especially if it's short. I also think if you need to use flashbacks a lot, you might consider starting your story earlier at those flashbacks and just tell that as part of the story. If so
which can
much
also
of
help
your
with word
story is
count if you're
happening in the past,
right.
You can do like one of those things that I don't count this as a flashback, but like parallel storytelling. And this is really interesting. I saw this done really creatively. It was cutting between these 2 characters, these 2 timelines effectively, but you don't know it's 2 separate timelines. So it's basically following this protagonist, and then it'll switch to this protagonist perspective, and you think it's just scene cutting. And then eventually you start going, wait, that has happened, like, and you start piecing it together, and then you find out it's 2 different timelines. And what's happening here is now influencing what's happening here, but you don't know that at the beginning. That's clever storytelling, and I wouldn't count that as flashbacks where you're doing that parallel storytelling. But you can also make it apparent that one's in the past, one's in the future. But if you're constantly doing that flashback from different characters' perspectives, it's gonna mess with the flow. So at that point, you might just want to consider starting earlier.
That's a good point. That's a good point. When you're messing with time, things can get really wonky really quick. You need to be very particular with how you write time stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And then I'd also say some other options for flashback, dealing with flashbacks. having longer flashbacks.
Hmm.
One bigger flashback as opposed to a bunch of small ones.
Definitely.
Now, I mean,
Definitely.
you can break rules. You can try things. We're talking about
Mhm.
general rules here. We don't want to put you in a box.
Right.
You know, like as I said, the
If it
story
works for
where
your story, yeah. If
right,
your rhythm of story is different, and you want to do that on purpose, you want like a staccato story, like where you're in and out, in and out, in and out. Then
yeah,
you could do that.
that's fine. Just be careful how you do it. Make sure it doesn't mess with the flow. You know, and like your story could be like as like the movie I was talking about, which I can't remember the name of, and I probably never will. Um, it's basically the whole movie is told in flashbacks, but it's done in a way that's not disruptive, and you can kind of piece it
Was
together.
it was it narrated over in the present, like the present protagonist was narrating over the flashback, explaining it, or were you just watching the flashback from that perspective?
Well, it's I think you were just watching the flashback from that
Okay.
perspective, but you knew going in like we're interviewing this guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
He saw this, and then it's flashback to what he saw, right? And
Mm-hmm.
this is movie, and it's not written form. So you can do something similar in a comic book where you have your investigators approaching somebody, and he goes, "Well," and then it kind of cuts to a new panel where you're
Right.
obviously aware this is his perspective of the murder, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and you get new details, and you want to watch for those, that kind of thing.
In comic books and graphic novels, it's probably a little easier to do because you can have that foggy, misty around the edges, little.
Right. Exactly. Um, thought bubbles,
Yeah,
things like that.
right,
There are ways visually to indicate that it's a flashback.
right,
But in writing, you could do that too. Maybe all of your flashbacks are italicized,
right,
um,
right.
or some other like characteristic of the
Hmm.
writing form that you can use to reveal this is a flashback.
Yeah, I wouldn't change fonts though. I've read books where they try to do that, where either certain characters are in certain fonts or a flashback is in a certain font, and it does take you out of the story
Yeah.
because your brain has to reconfigure. They've done a study that you can be a speed reader if you find that right font for you. So
Mm,
everybody can, like, if it's Calibri Light or if it's Times New Roman, certain people read different fonts faster. So finding one that works for you or one that's just generic for like all books. I don't know what the standard font is nowadays, but
I don't know either.
yeah, it does matter.
But yeah, so those are some tips and tricks. I hope this was helpful. Um, if this was helpful and you like this, please subscribe to our channel and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and the Patreon.
And if
Thank
you
you.
want to see us do live comedy in a live stream and just berate each other, we can make this happen.
We can. We can. Um, so thank you, Rory.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you for watching, and have a great day.